And good afternoon and welcome to the final event of the UVI Caribbean Green Technology Center's Energy Month webinar series. This October, we've cruised around the island at the Vivan St. Thomas Electric Vehicle Rally. We've learned the basics of energy generation and looked at maps of solar and wind potential here in the USVI. We've learned about solar installation from Brian Walden at Pro Solar and about sizing your system and navigating the WAPA Net Energy Billing Program. We've tuned in with the VI Energy Office to calculate the money you can save on your electricity bill by going solar, and we've learned how to set up our own solar and battery system as well as other helpful off-grid devices to help us power through blackouts. This month, we hope you have gotten a sense for the importance of energy in our territory and the role of renewable energy in increasing our independence, reducing the negative impacts on our environment, and preparing for the future. During our discussion today, we want to continue looking forward by discussing potential pathways for the energy transition here in the USVI and what we can do today to get there. Before we begin, I wanted to start with some housekeeping rules. So panelists cannot see or hear you. You can ask questions of the panelists by clicking on the Q&A button. The moderator will bring up your questions if and when relevant in the discussion. Feel free to use the chat room, and at certain points during the panel, we may ask you to give your responses in the chat. And finally, please be respectful of others. So to start, my name is Ariel Stoltz. I'm the Assistant Director of the Caribbean Green Technology Center at UVI. And today I'm joined by three distinguished panelists, each with their own unique views, experiences, and perspectives. First, I'd like to introduce Kyle Fleming, the Director of the VI Energy Office and WAPA board member. Kyle was born and raised on St. Croix and received a Bachelor of Science and Master's degree in Mechanical Engineering and Energy Systems. He then went on to work at an energy storage startup company in Boston and local solar installation company. He now leans on both his education and industry experience in his current position at the VI Energy Office. Next, I would like to introduce Doug White, a retired green architect who brings concepts of sustainability, care for the environment, hurricane resistance, and traditional West Indian building styles to the forefront of his designs. He specializes in tropical green building design and was also the former owner of Solar Supply, a renewable energy company in the VI for 20 years. Doug has lived with solar power and battery backup systems in his home and office for over 25 years. Finally, we are joined by Martin Ford, an energy and knowledge management consultant with 10 years of capacity strengthening and research experience. Originally from Barbados, Martin is currently based in Toronto at the Rocky Mountain Institute. His role includes connecting island community leaders around the world to tailored research, fellow subject matter experts, and training opportunities. So before we jump into our discussion, I wanted to ask you, Martin and Kyle, you've both studied energy in your schooling. What led you down this path? And what would you tell to fellow young Caribbean students aspiring for a career in energy?
I'll go first.
Yeah, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Ariel. Great introduction and a great segue into this discussion here. Definitely honored to be a panelist on this. I think a well diverse and wide perspective panel here today. So thank you. For me, energy really was driven by the conditions and challenges, or focusing on energy has been driven by the conditions and challenges that we face here in the Virgin Islands and in the Caribbean region as a whole. In regards to affordability and reliability of electricity was kind of one of the initial drivers. And so for me early on, while I was in school, it made sense to, to try to align my academia with the industry that I was hoping to, pursue in professional endeavor as well. And ultimately, even taking taking my academic trajectory as well as the start of my professional career stateside, I think that provided an amazing and broad perspective of, where just the different options that are available, as well as where the growth in the industry was going. So it only made sense that, being able to bring that perspective and expertise back home and implementing that here in the territory, just it all tied together. Because ultimately, I think I heard a quote recently. There's more impact, or sometimes the most impact you can draw is from doing work in your own backyard. And so being able to use those skills, especially the way the world is growing now, it just made perfect sense to try to align that skills and knowledge I've garnered and apply it here where the needs are ever so clear on a daily basis.
Yeah, and thanks for having me, and thanks Kyle, thanks Ariel, thanks Doug for all of this. To answer the question of how I got into the energy space, I actually, I would have to say it was growing up in Barbados. My grandfather was a big influence on me, and he was filmmaker, a very all-round type person. Like he made films, he was a gardener, and he would show me a lot of films with like documentaries with like Jacques Cousteau. So I actually wanted to be a marine biologist at first, and or something with international relations. And 2 years into my university at University of Toronto, I went to do a diving course back in Barbados. And after the first dive, I come up and all excited. And the dive instructor was like, yeah, the guy who's in the group that has asthma can't continue. And so I didn't want to be one of those marine biologists that's just stuck in a lab. I wanted to be like underwater exploring. And then at the time, another course I could have done was a course called climate change, actually, at university. And it was a great and amazing course, but it always like struck me like we would separate adaptation versus mitigation. And sometimes people like, I'm only thinking about adaptation in one way and mitigation another way. And I was like, well, coming from an island now, my perspective is we aren't really causing this, but we have to face the most direct impact. So what solutions can we put out there? And what was the best tool to advocate on behalf of island states? And so from then on, everything I did was focused on islands. But in school, because I was in environmental resource management, which is a geography program, it wasn't the hard engineering like Kyle would have done, right? So this goes to answer the advice part. I found that when I did the climate change course and the energy courses, that I wanted to have enough of an understanding of the technical side in order to bring people on board so that they see how complex resilience is, right? And at the time, sustainable development, that was the buzzword, right? So my professor at the time, he was like, the biggest thing that you can do to not just help advance yourself in your career, but also, help people understand the connections between adaptation, mitigation, is to be an effective communicator. And being able to communicate the technical concepts when speaking to engineers, being able to put in everyday terms when speaking to someone on the street. And that kind of has been my motivation. And that would also serve as my advice when you explore this field. Try to think how you can ground it in everyday language, and show the connectivity to other industries.
Thank you. I think that's great advice for any, UVI students or high schoolers who are listening in and are thinking about this career. It's very important topic of energy. And so small islands around the world, we really have a complicated relationship with energy. Most are highly dependent on imported oil or other fossil fuels for both transportation and electricity generation. And so to all of you, what are some of the reasons why energy security is such a struggle here in the islands?
Well, I guess I'll start off. I think the main issue is just simply because we're islands that we don't have in the States. You have a whole integrated grid, so that if one part of in one city, if the city or a region goes down, they can connect to the other regions, and they also have all of those resources that they can link back and forth together. For us, we have essentially one power system. And when that power system goes down, that's it. The standard thing is to have generators, but if you install solar, which is infinitely, when you look over the life cycle cost of solar, you're looking at it amortized around 10 or 13 cents a kilowatt hour over 25 years. So you not only have a reasonable source of energy, but you have a source of energy that's readily available if you have PV with battery backup in your house, so that it switches over automatically, and then you can provide, gives you power while the power's out. So microgrids, the development of microgrids is really a key detail for us to move forward with in the VI.
Yeah, and I would follow on to that relative to our location and our kind of standalone power grid that we have to supply here in the territory. Whereas, as Doug mentioned, where it's not as much of a interconnected resource as it tends to be in larger regions. Opens it up to more vulnerability as well. Vulnerability not just from the own challenges within the plant, but also for most island regions, especially here in the Caribbean, and honestly in most tropical regions, the susceptibleness to a wider range of natural disasters also emphasize that vulnerability, where our supply chains that have to support these areas could also be compromised. And so we really have to look at from a level of self-dependence when it comes to our energy system and our energy profile. And it's something that we see, as Doug mentioned, even from on the household level. We still look at it at the territory level relative to a self-dependence on being able to have to generate enough power to meet the actual needs, because it's a required resource for the entire community. And one of the things we also look at is our size as well. Whereas we have, you see a lot of times, there's a lot larger developments in technology and kind of strategies that are geared towards larger groups of people, larger customer bases, larger opportunity pools. The smaller Caribbean regions, while technology certainly can be applied here, it's not always the largest focus, especially of the biggest technology developers out there. They're looking really on being able to capture larger markets, and so there hasn't been as much of a dedicated, targeted, not to the same scale as you see some of the larger energy system development. I think we've been fortunate in recognizing not only our remoteness, our vulnerability, but also that self-serving nature that's been inherent to most island nations, and being able to identify ways in which we can adopt the technology, even if it's not sole source marketed towards us, being able to adopt it to our needs here in the island regions, which I think has been instrumental in really seeing a lot of advancements, whether it be from trying to capture what resources we have most abundantly available at our fingertips, and looking at trying to limit and distance ourselves away from 100% import in order to support our needs, which is, I think, once again, just kind of inherent self-serving nature of island nations.
Yeah, Kyle, I'll just pick up there. What you said about supply chain was kind of where I was going to take my answer, but there's an element of geopolitics to it, right? Um, a lot of islands, and my island of Barbados, we were members of the Commonwealth, and so like the system that we took over when we gained independence, 60s, uh, it was the electricity system was already dependent on fossil fuel, and that was the predominant thing, right? And so I have a boss who, he had said to me once, and I always stay in my mind, like, the Caribbean, we have achieved independence, but for the most part, but we've never really achieved energy independence. And you'll see like our money is pegged towards, price of oil goes up and down. And you can't look any further than this year and the 2008, the two major um, financial crises, well, now even more looming with COVID-19. But I remember June 2008, price of oil was $144 a barrel. April 20th, 2020 was the first time in history it went to negative prices. But supply chains were all halted. And so we're put in a scenario where it's not just our fossil fuel products, the cost of capital, these things that we need to be able to have in order to bring in goods and bring in supplies is a challenge. So I think we have an opportunity as well by our small size. Another colleague that I met, he said, I like to think of islands as like, and the fuel industry is when the dinosaurs went extinct. It's the smaller mammals and animals that were able to adapt and change in order to usher in a new type of be able to survive and continue. So I think like islands, we are vulnerable, and there are like energy security issues, but I think we also have to see our vulnerability of our size as an opportunity to be innovative with our energy systems. And I'm not saying that fossil fuel will disappear, but we can offset some of those costs using new technologies, especially now at a point where the techno-economics indicate that, there is parity for technologies like solar. And when you're looking at the trends of energy storage costs coming down, as Kyle would know as well with his expertise in storage, is like we now have an opportunity to pivot and position ourselves to reduce that the cost of importing fossil fuels.
Thank you guys for all those great responses. So Doug really talked to how we're not like the States, and we have to depend on resources that we can, that are abundant here in the islands, using technology like solar, microgrids. And Kyle really added to that, talking about the vulnerabilities that we have here in the territory. And so that when we're looking at strategies, we can just copy it from other places because we have such different constraints here. And finally, Martin, you left us with how our small size can be really an opportunity for us to adapt and be innovative. And one of the commonalities with all of your answers that I noticed was that each of you really talked about renewable energy. And so I wanted to move into the next topic. So there are other islands who are really trying to change their trajectory. One of those we might know from the US is Hawaii. And they historically were one of the most fossil fuel dependent states in the US, but now they're really leading the charge in the energy transition with ambitious goals and targets for 100% clean energy by 2045. So in the US Virgin Islands, can we, and even should we, aim to get to this 100% renewable or clean energy goal? And what are our options here?
Well, I'll start and take a quick stab from but from not just from the energy office, but just honestly from an industry standpoint, for the territory, and I know that there's in the past we've had some milestones that we had set, and I think one of the major focuses that I've had while at the energy office is really looking at some of the goals that we're setting, because the goals that were set 10 years ago, it's one of the things about this industry, and maybe even going back to where some of the ambition and motivation to continue is just seeing how quickly things change and evolve within this energy industry. The discussions we're having today about even the potential of being closer to either zero carbon or 100% renewable, they really seemed like pipe dreams not too long ago. Whereas now, 10, 15 years from some of these early developments, we're looking at very commonplace integration on a wide range of energy advancements. And so that in of itself is comforting, because we see, yes, even though while we may set goals today, we always have to keep our mind kind of open to the variability, and also just recognizing just how much growth there is still to come as more and more interest within pushing the technology to the leading front. And we're also seeing so many effects on the environmental side, which is also driving a lot of the push and development of the technology that we see as being able, especially from the renewable energy front. I think while the possibilities are certainly growing, I think there's also a realization and kind of an expectation throttling that comes as well, because we want to make sure that we're being practicing due diligence, and also being very well aware of some of the still existing challenges that are happening today. So we don't only just look at what's going on, what could happen in the long term, but also what steps we need to accomplish. And so from the Virgin Islands standpoint, I think while there's certainly been a lot of desire and want to see that change happen immediately, I think we've certainly had some some arduous steps in moving things to where we would like them to be. I think that what it really has come down to is being able to capture specifically the vision that we think is most realistic in the near term. And I see that while we know that renewables are certainly growing, I think there's still a balance within the near term where we will still see some form of traditional generation still be part of our mix. I think what we need to do is understand, okay, how much can we, what are some of our new baselines? If we're looking 5 years from now, with the amount of renewables that we can bring on, can we bring that thermal generation baseline down to where it's really looking at being kind of a stabilizing factor more so than a primary generation factor, and look at more of kind of a weaning approach to getting there, and because it really becomes a balance of systems after a while as well, because obviously given the nature of renewables, once we start balancing out some of the intermittency issues, which we're seeing energy storage handle so well, those discussions, those possibilities, and that kind of reduction on that thermal baseload continues to decrease once we can balance out the intermittency of some of the renewables as well. And that's another major stride in the technology front, because I mean, 5 years ago, I can remember many platforms, people saying that there's no way we can really look at solar because at night there's no solar. And where that became just this kind of stopgate for really trying to push the dialogue forward. Well, here is energy storage come in to play now to say that really this balancing act doesn't have to be as difficult as it was once presumed. So I think once again, I think that not to say to, I think setting the goals 100% are there's no harm in going that approach. I think what we need to throttle is our expectation and kind of what that timeline itself actually looks like, given the technology and given what's available to us at this moment.
Well, I would support, exactly. I think what Kyle's saying is really what's going to have to happen. But I would like to talk and address it from the point of the huge energy burden that fossil fuels are placing on the territory right now. That's both on our businesses and on our homeowners. And so that widespread distribution of solar with battery backup can really alleviate that for a lot of people. Solar right now is cheaper than oil and gas, so that in the statesides on a large scale. So the reality is that any business is going to migrate to the least expensive systems. And solar, with distributed solar, that means having solar all over the island, not just in one big array, because we can see what happens to one large array in a storm, or if in the intermittency, if there's a cloud that comes over. But it's very rare that the whole island is going to be covered with cloud cover. And so that strengthens the grid, putting renewable energy into the grid, all over the grid, and then managing it, very similar to what the internet is, where your energy system is giving and taking both energy and information back and forth. So that if you have storage, we have storage all over the island in people's residences and in their businesses. That's one huge virtual battery bank that can be used for demand response to help to stabilize the grid. Now, I know this is long-term thinking, but I think this is really where we need to be going, to develop microgrids on an individual, a home level, where you have more than one source in your home, and then expanding that out to neighborhood levels and neighborhood substations, and then to the territory as a whole. This is what Puerto Rico's in the midst of restructuring and rebuilding their whole energy grid now based on this concept. And I think the Virgin Islands we should follow suit.
Martin, I just have one quick
Yeah.
follow-up to Doug, and I'll let you go. That's not as far away as you think, Doug. We actually have a number of resources that we're putting towards better understanding exactly what those type of systems will look like, and actually and how they will interact here in the Virgin Islands. And that's I'm not looking years out on that possibility. We're much closer to that reality. So just to interject there, but Martin, please go ahead.
No. Actually, what I'm about to say is actually a synergy of both of what you said. And I absolutely love that Doug said energy and information. We're now entering into an information age and grid modernization more generally, where in order to do that, though, we have to have the data. And so I like to use the metaphor of like a computer system where it has interoperability between nodes. And if you start to think of networks, there are networks all around us, like even neural networks, and it usually consists of multiple nodes connected. And that is the interoperability comes into play, where if say Wapa's had a solar farm, that's one node, but then Doug and Kyle at their houses, they have energy system as well. That's the distributed side of it. And to that point, in order to get to that goal, the step towards that is going to have to include some level of utility scale systems, managed and operated, like with the utility, because they have the most technical acumen when it comes to a system with entrenched cost. And, we're at the beginning of a transition, but it's also going to rely on the citizens having that distributed system now, actually, especially if you have, say, a microgrid. If there is an issue on St. John and there's a microgrid in St. Thomas, then they can operate independently if there was like damage to a system from like a hurricane. But this is something that we're seeing like in islands across the region. You would have the aspiration of 100% renewable energy. as you reach different levels of capacity, so Hawaii has had struggles, you know, going, you know, at first you start off and they're learning through the transition to 30% or 35, then you get into the 55% range. It's a different technical challenge there. So it's great to have the aspiration, but with any goal, you have to really analyze and have a baseline for where you're at. And that's where like integrated resource planning comes into play. And now I would like to actually extend that to say integrated resource and resiliency planning. So with my work with RMI, with some of our projects, what we do is we try to understand the location and the technical limits of that particular grid. And then also, where are the resources? Where is the ideal place to put wind? What are the goals of the country? And once you have that, then you can present that to policymakers to say, okay, this is where you can reach in terms of the amount of renewable energy penetration, or to get to that first 30. And then if you want to go to the next 50, it becomes this iterative living experience that you go through with all the stakeholders. And a critical part to that is making sure that to reaching 100% is that we are in the process creating professional development for local citizens, so that they are developing the technical acumen to be able to maintain systems and moving in that direction. So I think it's great, like Kyle said, to have the goals. I think what Doug said about energy and information, once having that data allows us to make changes and see and learn and be iterative in the process moving forward. But I think it's happening at a speed, like Kyle said, like I remember 8 years ago when I was a student, and there was, you know, people were like, there's no way you're doing it. There's no way. But I think, you know, things are coming on board.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no,
I just wanted to say, like, you know, when we're talking about these aspirational goals and plans that we might have, you guys really started already mentioning some of the like projects and initiatives that are happening either in the Virgin Islands or around in the Caribbean. And I just wanted to really continue on this topic about like, what are the actual steps that we need to take if this is our goal. And I know that some of our audience members have already mentioned some of those steps. I just want to read them out to you guys and get your opinion. But we have some people who are asking about solar water heaters and different, also, you know, adopting the goals of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have questions about the residential programs like Living Building Challenge to make homes net positive, and other alliances, United States Climate Alliance, and just, you know, offering training certifications and other projects for kind of reaching these goals. And like, maybe if you can also provide some examples from either what's happening here in the territory or from other regions or islands around.
Yeah, so one thing I'll actually start with, and Martin, I'm probably gonna have to copyright this from you, but I think vulnerability as an opportunity may become my new catchphrase. And I think it's actually, within my time here at the Energy Office, I've realized truly how much our vulnerability has created in terms of opportunity and the support that's actually being made available to us here in the territory. I mean, I assume most people on this call are from the U.S. Virgin Islands, and one thing, and Martin, you could probably speak to this as well, by I guess the comparison relative to being under the U.S. flag relative to the federal support that has been made available to develop some of the quantitative analytics and also the policy development around these things that as Doug mentioned, that we're trying to see here. I'll speak specifically to that under one of the U.S. Department of Interior grants. that the Energy Office currently has and is administering. It's a distributed generation market structure grant, which allows for us to be able to actually assess the feasibility, both the economic and technical feasibility of this distributed aggregate of controlling resources, and the positive and basically be able to list out and develop the value stack of benefits, whether it be from the grid services to the system as a whole, that type of control system can allow. Not only does it allow for the technical and economic feasibility, but it also allows for the policy development side. Because while we can certainly allow the electrons to flow, there still has to be some type of policy framework, some type of whether it be compensation structure or credit structure that gets built into a program like that as well, since you're talking about this fully interconnected system. And so that's just one kind of funding opportunity that was made available to the territory to be able to not just have these conversations, but actually dig into the substance of what bringing those type of initiatives to fruition could actually mean. And there's a number of different resources that have been made available to us here that we have here in the territory from the federal sense, that between the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Department of Interior, in the Energy Office alone, we have currently over $4 million worth of funding opportunities that we're working feverishly to mobilize as quickly as possible, because the needs have never been more clear. It's one of the reasons why we spent a lot of time, and Errol, you mentioned earlier in that building program that we did some webinars on earlier. Being able to create policy is critical, especially when we're looking at the scale of impact, right? We're not just looking at one or two homes. We're looking at really being able to have a standard by which the entire territory can participate. And so that's, obviously with big project and with larger impact becomes a broader due diligence and being able to make sure you're checking off all the boxes and doing it thoroughly and correctly. But once again, I think I've been comforted, and one of the things I'm trying to communicate out as well is that we have a extensive amount of support and resources that are not only available today, that are constantly being made available to us. It's very easy for us to justify our needs for support, once again, going back to our vulnerability. And that in of itself has truly opened a lot of doors. And I think maybe if the committee hasn't been seeing it yet, I guarantee you within the next 12 months, we're going to be seeing a lot of that coming to fruition here throughout the territory as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kyle, just to build on what you're saying and some of the questions I see around, jobs and training. I know like at Carolec where I work as well, we do a lot of like technical development, and there's been a big push in the region for technical training. I know the Caribbean Development Bank also offers different types of training, and there may be that sort of thing coming on board. I really do think we need to share lessons, but one thing that there is such a huge opportunity for is the creation of equity, and not just in terms of, equity, like I have an equity stake in a business. It's an opportunity for a more, I guess, in putting the dialogue and a narrative that connects how going towards these industries can create further job opportunities. And, like in my country, in Barbados, the tourism sector hit hard by COVID. A lot of islands hit hard by COVID. And there's been a big discussion about, well, what industry can we go towards? How do we invest our money? How can we make our money work for us, right? And so I know back home, there's a push by our government to also allow investment through credit unions, because then, the society can also invest into solar, but there needs to be regulation to allow for these type of channels, and there needs to be an assessment of what that would do for the economy, right? There's also the big push for what are what besides tourism are the big income earners that we can have as islands? And can we create knowledge economies? Because when you really look at it, right, we're part of the climate divide. We get hit, we emit less than 1% of the world, as a Caribbean region, no, we emit less than 1% of the world's total carbon emissions, but we are getting hit by sometimes 3, 4 hurricanes above category 3 in a year, and they're coming every year. So now this is opportunity where, you know, if we want to create equity, we want to adopt, we want to lead. We are leading. We have no choice, is what I'm trying to say. And in so doing, there's intellectual, I guess, the intellectual property of what we learn is very valuable, because as we develop jobs or in these industries, we now can go to other jurisdictions and demonstrate to them, hey, we were able to transition to 40, 50, 60, 80%. And we are doing it out of necessity, not because we are delayed in back and forth. We have no choice. And out of that, we then become leaders and can take our expertise beyond our shores or share it, you know, digitally. And I think even when you look at, oh, I have to work from home, and it's not ideal, but having this access to information, the world has now created a behavior where what you're doing in the USVI is extremely valuable as it goes on, and you can share that with a broader audience. And in so doing, create interest in what you're doing. And each of us have an individual culture. Barbados culture is different to Crucian culture, to you know, what do you call people from St. Thomas again, Kyle?
Tomians.
Tomians, right. So Tomian, Crucian, St. Johnian. Yeah. Yep. Okay, great. Yeah, I feel like we can wrap this technology in the culture that we have, and really show that, you know, before the buzzwords of sustainability and resilience, this was how island people live. Common sense. Anyway, I talked enough, and I saw it as a living building challenge question, and Doug and I were just talking about that. So I'll just pivot to you, Doug, if there's anything you want to add.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to, I think that's great. I think we need to, you know, it just highlights the fact that we need to think globally and act locally. And to get this great penetration that we're talking about of renewable energies into the grid, it's still going to come back to individuals and businesses and homeowners. And also someone mentioned interest in solar hot water heating. And Martin, you would know that Barbados has been way ahead of the Caribbean for years. They've had 70 to 80% penetration of solar hot water heaters in Barbados since, I think, going back to the first energy crisis in the 70s.
Yeah.
But you need to start thinking on a local level about life cycle cost when you're thinking about employing renewables. Because I'll just give you a quick example of solar hot water. You know, if you install a conventional hot water heater, at the end of 10 years, it's going to have you're going to pay $10,000 for that, paying for electricity for that. Whereas if you bite the bullet and through some of the great programs that the Energy Office has over the years, if you install a solar hot water heater, at the end of 10 years, you're going to have $10,000 in your savings account, because it doesn't cost anything to operate. And that's the incredible thing to me about renewables and solar power, is that yes, the upfront costs are huge. And that's what we need to be able to get these you know, into the community. And I'm involved with a program right now, which Kyle is also consulting on, called Solarize St. Thomas, which is a group buying program to be able to bring the cost of solar down for people. And we're also attempting to install a low to moderate income family grant program within that, because if we want to have widespread penetration of solar in the Virgin Islands, it just can't be the people that can afford to pay for 25 years worth of power up front. We need to figure out ways and devices to get solar down so that it can be installed in everyone's home and everyone can have it. And when the power goes out, you don't worry about it, because you just switch over to your battery backup and that's it. You know, you're happy until power comes back on.
Yeah, you said something there that stood out to me. I just wanted to mention really quick, Ariel. When you said about what you said about the passive solar, right? The water heating, passive options, like how we build our building form, how we create energy efficiency within our homes will reduce the demand for energy as well. So it's kind of, but sometimes energy efficiency is not discussed as much as renewable energy, because it's not like, I could see solar panels, I could see the wind farm, okay, it has the energy being generated, but it also becomes like, what is your behavior and your use of it and your timing of it? And like, so there's a lot of wiggle room for us to reduce our demand, save money that way, then put in the systems or put them in parallel. And I think we're at a point where people are beginning to understand that light just doesn't come when you flick on the switch.
Yeah, that was really great. That's actually what I was about to ask Doug, if you could, as your role as, architect, talk to a bit of these strategies for reducing energy, whether it's energy efficiency, but also those kind of passive strategies just from how you build your home.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. When I first moved here into the Caribbean about almost 40 years ago, my background was in historical architecture, and I came down here. I looked at traditional Caribbean building, and I said, "Hey, man, these guys, they figured it out 300 years ago. It's all the principles are right here. You orient your buildings toward the trade winds. We have trade winds that blow all year long. So take advantage if you're building a new house or renovating or whatever, take advantage of those natural breezes that blow. And think about the sun paths. We love to build out of masonry for hurricanes, but masonry holds heat. So that if you have your southern walls, if you use the traditional porches and galleries around the masonry base of the house, then that shades the walls from the sun, and they don't sit there, the walls don't absorb heat all day long and then radiate heat back into the night. So there are a lot of different things that you can do, with daylighting as an example. Think about designing your house with a lot of large openings. And that's, if you look at traditional West Indian architecture, there are a lot of openings to let the light and the air flow through. And now, we're in a situation where, we have to have air conditioning. So that's a design mitigation issue to be able to, you want to be able to close it up when you need to, but you want to also be able to open it up all the way to be able to let the light and the breezes come in. So I think orientation is very, very important. And these energy efficiency, energy saving techniques that you can install. I mean, simple things like changing out your light bulbs to LED light bulbs can save a huge amount of energy over time.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of those really cool strategies for reducing your energy use just by how the home is built. But I think this really leads to that, not everybody has the ability to implement these strategies, although they're amazing and they work. Not everyone's in that position. And this kind of like leads into the next topic. So if you've heard the term of like climate gentrification, so when cities, they start to take on these agendas for environmental sustainability or eco-friendly, and they really invest heavily in redevelopment projects that just push people who live there out of these areas. And so when I just wanted to ask you guys, what happens when we don't pay attention to the power, the politics, and really social justice when we're transitioning to these great topics that we talked about today in terms of renewable energy and sustainability? And, those people who are at risk of being left behind, how can we, make sure that that doesn't happen and eliminate that issue?
Well, I'll speak to a couple different areas where I think that we're once again, we kind of have some opportunity to leverage that vulnerability, because I think that kind of going back to the actually Martin made, looking at where we are right now, as we're still in the midst of the COVID global crisis, and what that obviously means relative to really looking at what's next. I like going back to not that I like going back to 2008, but in terms of energy development, one of the major driving forces behind a lot of energy development, especially renewable energy development in the early part of the last decade, was the stimulus acts that came out of the Great Recession, primarily like the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. I can say with absolute confidence, I was the first job I ever held within the energy industry was for a startup company in energy storage that received a multi-million-dollar grant from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And I think that is, when we really look at shovel-ready projects, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's energy efficiency, when we really look at shovel-ready projects, that the energy industry really provides such a wide spectrum of opportunities there. You're able to kind of couple the same societal issues that the community that wide communities are exposed to, and be able to channel the investment to basically hit two sides of the fence simultaneously, where you're able to create jobs, create opportunities, create the economic recovery, while also making sure that you're addressing clear societal needs as well. So I think if we're really clear about what about like where those two opportunities exist, and very pragmatic about how we approach it, I'll give an example. We I guess even speaking to the ARA funds, when I came into the energy office, we had some funds remaining from the ERA days, because the energy office actually received a significant amount of funding during that stimulus period, and there was still some funds remaining even from then that hadn't been expended or removed. So we had an opportunity to actually repurpose some of those funds towards a project very similar to what Doug was mentioning from the Solarized standpoint, where we're currently looking at grants for a grant program for low to moderate income households as well, where we're looking at shovel-ready projects that can not only put develop and build a local workforce to support, but also be able to bolster the energy affordability and resiliency of the underserved parts of our community. So I think if we're intentional about how we kind of package the opportunities that are presented as a result of some of the challenges that COVID has presented, we could really look at two birds, one stone in a lot of ways. And that ultimately is certainly a focus of ours. I think it's being able to leverage that vulnerability with the opportunity. And I think that's a primary focus that I think we all should be looking at it in various sectors as well.
Yeah, Kyle, I like your analogy, two birds, one stone. I like to say feed two birds with one seed, right? because okay, like you look at island environments and the things that cause inequity, right? So there's financial inequity, there's also access to resources that we need, like water, etc. I think if when I say you, I mean the Caribbean, want to really address inequities, we need to look at the synergies between different industries, how renewable energy maps to those industries and also take chances on being innovative. So you mentioned the grant system. That's awesome. I didn't know that about USVI. I've seen another jurisdiction where, in order to make sure that the persons who are in a lower economic bracket than the richer persons can still buy into the distributed energy, they're considering setting a higher incentive for them. So they might have a smaller system, but the incentive is greater to purchase a system and get reimbursed for their fuel, so that it's more even across all tiers of society. That was an example I've seen. And then I know about earlier I mentioned, credit unions creating an investment opportunity. When you look at solar panel array, it can last 20 to 30 years. So looking at investment such as solar bonds, types of investment mechanisms that then allow more local businesses to own a stake within the energy, their own energy security. And we all know that if you can have that ownership of something, you're likely to take care of it, because it's something that will grow passively as we transition and build out. And that I've seen that in other jurisdictions, but I think the reason I mention that is I think understanding these little innovations and sharing the knowledge and information, like I would love to see, the grant process that you guys are looking at and compare it to another island jurisdiction. And then through that, we start to iterate and innovate to create more equitable and more social justice.
We'll definitely keep you in the loop.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think, the bottom line is we really need all of these solutions to be brought together to work together, because we have a huge environment, as I mentioned, a huge energy burden here and a huge environmental justice burden here, where our energy cost is 5 times more than what it is on the mainland. So I think we need to work on it from a program level, but and all the way down to just the reality is, is I'm a hands-on nuts and bolts guy. We need to get more solar panels distributed out there to everyone, so that, and this is one of the things I really liked about the UVI program, they're powering through a blackout program, is that you can even start very small with very small systems, and then build up with that. Because once you find out the amazing benefits of solar, I mean, who ever heard of an energy source that has no moving parts, makes no noise, requires no fuel, and just sits there all day long and makes electricity? Hello, everybody needs this.
Yeah, I think that really, we need all of these solutions to be working together to get us to the goals that we set for ourselves. And we're almost out of time for today, but I don't know if each of you guys would like to take maybe 30 seconds to, one thing that you hope the audience takes away from this conversation that we've had.
I've got a quick, I'll do a closeout. And also I took a quick glance at the Q&A, and I think I saw one of the questions was in regards to any training or certification. And so I just wanted to call notice. So we recently received, last year, at the end of last year, we received a grant for a microgrid at the St. Croix Educational Complex here on St. Croix. And in that grant proposal, we set aside funding to be allocated towards microgrid training as well as certification as well. And so that's something that we're trying to also incorporate as kind of standard place with a number of our grants, as if we're not just looking at the physical asset, and obviously that presents a huge value add. However, I think the bigger picture value add is certainly incorporating workforce development wherever possible with any of the grants that we strive to seek out, especially understanding that we have a very limited labor pool here in the territory, especially in this very specific arena. So I just wanted to answer that one question that was asked about that. And so yes, look forward to that forthcoming, as well as other training and workforce development opportunities as well.
I think, Ariel, to your question about what I would like to tell the audience, I'd like to tell the audience to think, to find the connections between energy and other areas, because that's the future. So we talked a lot about electricity production, just generation in itself, transmission, distribution, but electric vehicles are the new biggest trend that is going to hit. So in terms of carbon emissions, it's electricity production, transportation are two of the biggest, agriculture is one of the biggest, and industry. So how do we look at each of our industries and say, how does renewable energy fit into this mix? How does energy efficiency fit into this mix? What innovations are on the horizon that will be, and can we use this opportunity now to leapfrog?
Yes, okay. I think I'd like to just pick up on a couple of those and totally agree with Kyle that I think workforce development is really the key issue here, because we're talking about, if we're going 100% renewable or even anywhere close to that, we're talking about needing a huge retrained workforce in the Virgin Islands to do that. And we also, if we have that workforce development, then possibly we could also attract some light manufacturing, assembly of photovoltaic panels and other things like that here in the territory to provide, instead of running headlong into reopening an oil refinery, which is going in the wrong direction. I'm sorry, but we could start trying to develop light industry based around renewable energy, and also and picking up Martin on your electric vehicle comment. We do have an electric vehicle association in St. Thomas and St. John Vivan, and we have annual rallies. We think there are probably about 150 electric vehicles in the Virgin Islands, but the good news for WAPA is that the more electric vehicles we have on island, the more electricity they will use. So this can be, as people install more solar in their homes with battery backup, they're going to be using less of WAPA's power, but that can be offset by people charging their vehicles. And right now, you've seen the data from Consumer Reports. Electric vehicles over their life cycle cost 50% less than owning a gas vehicle. They're an incredibly superior technology, and they can help offset the switch to renewable energy. Even if you charge them on WAPA, they're less expensive than running an ICE internal combustion engine vehicle.
We're pushing aggressively on that on the GVI front as well, Doug. I think we mentioned at the last rally. We actually recently just started a work